Redeemer, happy Saturday. Welcome back as we are in our fourth of 5 good words for us from the Psalms in the month of August. As we enter into Psalm 62, we're going to talk about rest and look around and think about rest in the society around us. Think about all the apps and products that are being spent tons and tons of pounds on in order for people to find rest. You've got apps to help you sleep. You've got products to aid you in your REM cycles. We're spending money in order to find physical rest. We're spending money on holidays, and even though we're all dying to get away this summer, and it's difficult for some of us to move around, we're desiring holiday time because we know that if we can just get on that beach, that if we can just find that lake, if we can find the mountains, we can find rest. And we're desiring, and many of us are spending a lot of money and time with life coaches and mentors to try to find direction to solve our restlessness. And it's not just society as a whole, it's us too in the church. We're a restless people, and we're a people looking to find deep soul rest. And that leads us into Psalm 62, where to find that rest. Psalm 62. Look at verse 3 and 4. It's going to tell us first that we need rest, something we already know, but let's not get fooled. We need rest. Verses 3 and 4. How long will you assault me? David says. Would you all throw me down? This leaning wall, this tottering fence. He's saying, I'm shaking. I'm about to go down. Surely they intend to topple me from my lofty place. They take delight in lies, and with their mouths they bless, but in their hearts they curse. He has people and armies after him. He was actually the fugitive of the largest manhunt in the history of Israel. He had the whole king's army after him. He knows what it feels like to be sought after and weary. He had enemies both on the outside of his house and even inside of his palace when he was king. He had foreign armies knocking at his door trying to overthrow them. Think about being the ruler of a country. We see these pictures and kind of laugh at them after a 4-year term of U.S. presidents, how much they age just from the weight of ruling and running a country. He had all this pressure, a man who had a hard time finding rest. He also experienced a wearying pain and turmoil internally. It wasn't just outside of him, forces outside of him that were causing pressure and a lack of rest. It was inside. This is a man who was an adulterer and a man who was a murderer. He knew the restlessness of guilt. He was a man who lost a child in their infancy. He knew the restlessness and the wearying toll that grief can take on a person. He had enemies outside his house. He had enemies inside his house. He felt disappointment about not being the one that was going to be able to build the temple for God. Restlessness everywhere he turned. There was no circumstantial rest to be found for this man, David. But David knew this pressure, and he knew that he needed rest. And we see it here in Psalm 62. And like David, we need rest from what's out there, and we need rest from what's in here as well. We need rest from what's out there. Culture's telling us who we've got to be, what we've got to live up to, and there's this pressure to get in the rat race, and it's wearying. We have turmoil in our families. We have frustration in our friend groups and in our relationships with our significant others. It's wearying. We all know the exhaustion of taking care of responsibilities, even though none of us are leading states right now. We know what it feels like to lead a family and the pressure and the toll that takes on someone. We know what it feels like to have responsibilities at work, and it's wearying. And like David, we need rest from the restlessness inside of us. Some of us, we've experienced pain because of actions done to us or even actions that we've done. We can't kick it, and it's just worrying and wearying. We feel the exhaustion of our own moral failures, and we know what it feels like to have desires that are unmet. We want things. We've organized our life to achieve those things, and they're not coming through, and we're restless. We know what it feels like to have ambitions that we actually can't see come to fruition. And David felt like this leaning wall, this tottering fence that was almost about to come down. What about you? You look forward to the summer, you look forward to taking a break, spend a few weeks away, and you come back. Was it really all it was cracked up to be? Do you really feel that deep soul rest? Well, we all do need rest, and the good news here from Psalm 62 is that in God we can find rest. The weary can find rest. Verses 1 and 2, truly or only my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He's my fortress. I shall never be shaken. It gets repeated in verses 5 and 6. Yes, my soul find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He's my fortress. I shall not be shaken. So here's David, this man who knows all the pressure, all the stress, and what it feels like to be weary, and yet he found rest. He found rest in God. Years of running, years of guilt, years of grief, and he finds rest in this God. He says, this God is my rock. Truly, he is my rock. And it's a throwback to what we just studied as a church family a few months ago in Exodus. He says he's my rock. And we saw the rock in Exodus 17 when God's people were running their way through the wilderness. They were trying to find their way to the promised land and ran out of food, ran out of water, and they get to this place and they start complaining. And God points them to a rock. And out of that rock came provision, water for the people to last another day. And just like that rock was a provider for the people in the desert, so God is for David. He was a provider. That rock was a provider. God was a provider, and he is for you and I today. Not only the rock of provision, but we look back at Exodus 33 and 34 as well. The rock provided protection. Remember when God's people, they disobeyed God as Moses was up on the mountain with God, and the people, they just got tired. They threw all their jewelry in to make a golden calf, and they started bowing down and worshiping the calf. And God said, fine, guys, have it your way. You can have the calf. You can't have me. My presence will not go with you. But Moses said, God, we need you. If your presence doesn't go with us, we don't have a hope. Go with us. Please show me your glory. And God said, no man can see my full glory and live. So he hid Moses in a cleft in a rock. It provided provision and protection for Moses. And David knew this well. It wasn't just the people in Exodus. David. I've been to Israel, and there's this place called En-Gedi. It's down near the Dead Sea. It's on the cliffs. It's barren. It's dry. There's nothing around it. And yet David, when he was fleeing for his life from King Saul, he found the caves of En-Gedi, these rocks where he could hide and find protection from Saul. And it has this little spring, nothing else around it, but this little spring of an oasis running through En-Gedi. David knew what it was like to find provision and protection in the rocks. And he says, God, truly, you are my rock. The one who was a fugitive found rest in the rocks in the desert, and he found rest for his soul in the rock of ages. So for the weary and the tired and the restless of us today, you can find rest from striving to provide for your own needs. Rest from trying to sort out your own desert experiences. We can find provision from God. And we can also rest in his protection. He's a fortress, David says. We can find him and be secure and safe, have our needs protected. More than our physical bodies, he's a refuge for our souls. It says this in the very next chapter, Psalm 63:1. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there's no water. David knew what it felt like to be in a dry and parched land, running for his life, and yet to find God, the one who fully satisfied and the one who gave that sweet rest he was looking for. So we know we need rest. We need rest, and we see that in God the weary find rest. And the big idea as we close, thirdly, is that God supplies rest like no other. He's not just one of many options we can go to find this soul rest. God provides a rest unlike anything else we could ever go to try to find it. Verses 7 and 8. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is a mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And the metaphor of a rock is really helpful, but it was intended to not just point to God being his rock, but he came through right after that 3 different times in the text and says, God is my salvation. And like the rock was both provision and protection, David knew, and you and I can know today, that salvation from God is the ultimate provision and the ultimate protection, the ultimate place to find rest for the Christian. Our own efforts to find satisfaction and meaning in life continually leave us restless. Our own efforts to live up to God's moral standard, we continually fall short, and it's wearying. Our strivings to pad our bank accounts and find new friends and find that special person that we're going to spend our life with, it just leaves us feeling even more exposed. But God is the one who provides ultimate salvation. God is the one who's the ultimate protection and provision, and we see it ultimately in 1 Corinthians. In chapter 10, verse 4, Paul looked back at the rock that the desert wanderers in Egypt found as the water provision and the provision from and the protection for Moses. And Paul looked back and he said, but that rock was Christ. That rock was Christ. David's looking here. He's saying, you're my rock. You're my salvation. And David's great-great-grandson ultimately provided the ultimate protection, the ultimate provision on the cross centuries later. The one in whom we find the deepest rest is Jesus, the one who laid his life down for us, the one who gives us protection and provision. Nothing else and no one else in this world supplies rest like the triune God. God sent Jesus. Jesus gave his life, and the Spirit applies this rest to our lives. Provision of a Christ as sacrifice in our place. It should have been me. It should have been you. But Christ in our place is the ultimate place where we can find rest. Provision of a righteousness in Christ that isn't our own. He took our sin and we get his righteousness and eternal protection for our souls in Jesus. In John 10, Jesus says, if you're mine, you hear my voice and no one can snatch you out of my hand. Eternal protection in Jesus. Verse 8, David finishes with trust in him at all times, you people. Trust in God, Redeemer, at all times. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. God, brothers and sisters, is our ultimate rest. Nothing else in all the world offers a refuge like him. David tried it all. He had everything at his disposal and found in God alone the one whom he could really find rest. So, Redeemer family, as we head into an autumn where we're trusting God for all sorts of things, let's not be so worried about doing for him before we rest in him. Let's trust him to show up as we rest in him and as we find his provision and protection to be sweet and to be enough. He alone provides rest for our souls. Nothing else can bear up under the weight of what we need. So hear the invitation from Jesus as we close in Matthew chapter 11, 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.